think we're live on the Frugal Crafter YouTube channel. I'm Lindsay, here with Sarah today.
Hi.
And we've had a little bit of a rough start, but onward and upward. We are going to paint these donuts in watercolor. We may use some colored pencil down the road. We may not. It's an optional supply. If you have questions as we go along, please type the word question in all caps in the chat if you're watching us live. Otherwise, you can leave a question in the replay and we'll get back to you later. And then type your question in regular upper and lowercase words, because if you put in everything in all caps, sometimes YouTube just throws out the comment, like they think it's spam. So just put the word question in all caps. That way Sarah can see it and the moderators can see it. And if the moderators can help you, they will. And if not, Sarah will send the question over to me. Do you have anything to add?
I think that's it.
Awesome. We're just going to jump into it because this picture is going to take the full hour, and we're just gonna get right to it. So I have the pattern on on another piece of watercolor paper here that I've taped down. And I'm going to show you the reference photo. This is from Storyblocks, which is formerly Graphic Stock. So you can see how I decided to simplify it a little bit. I omitted one of the strawberries and made the donuts a little bit flatter on the plate. And when I was transferring my sketch, I forgot to add the extra little line in there. So I will do that. So I just wanted to show you that, and also to let you know that this is I have a membership at Storyblocks, so I'm using this photo, but if you wanted to sell a painting that you did from that photo, you would need to get a membership there, just because that's how the licensing works there. I couldn't find donuts on Unsplash or Pixabay that I did. This is what I originally started with, but I really wasn't happy with it. It was vexing me, and I wasn't enjoying painting it, so I decided to go back to the drawing board last night, and I went with an image from Storyblocks. So I just wanted to give you that information. We're going to begin by wetting the entire paper. A little froggy. I haven't talked out loud yet today. Let's give it a good coating of water. And I'm using some new paints today. I've been asked a lot over the last couple of years to review ShinHan professional watercolors. And I kept putting it off. They've been in my basket, and I finally decided to bite the bullet and order a set. They're really inexpensive for watercolors. A set of 30 is like $25.79 or something. This is what the colors look like. I'll do a full review once I've used them more, but so far so good. I've been having a good time playing with them. I am going to mix brown, which is the same pigment as burnt sienna, the PBR 25, and it looks, I'm sorry, PBR 7, and it looks just like burnt sienna. Sometimes the PBR 7 is cooler, but this one, so if you don't have this set, use burnt sienna from whatever set you do have. Let's scoot that over a little bit. And I'm going to add some ultramarine blue, so I make a nice gray. I'm going to clean my brush in between colors because they haven't dried down fully yet. That's one of the things I like to test before I review, is how well they dry down, and you know, if they crack or if they fade or get chalky. And so far I've had some good luck. I'm going to take that dark color and I am going to go into the shadow areas. I'm just going to get I'm going to have it so I can see my reference photo and my painting. So I want to get some under here, under the plate. It's going to bleed into other areas, but don't worry about that. Just we're going to kind of tone the paper a little bit. And more information on supplies and downloadable pattern are in the video description and also on my blog. I'm going to grab some raw umber. You could also use yellow ochre or raw sienna. Really want it watery. And I'm just going to pull a little bit of that into the background to warm it up a little bit. And a little in the foreground too. Grab a paper towel and just lift a little bit off of the lip of the plate there, because I don't want to have any want to have any color there. Ultramarine blue and burnt sienna lift really well, so just I'm just blotting as I go. I'm using an old sheet of Fabriano Artistico that I had in my stash. It's not my favorite paper. The paper I used for my practice piece was one of the Hannah Mule ones that I'll be reviewing this weekend. It's the Cezanne paper. It's not that widely available in the United States, but if you're in Europe, it's a wonderful paper, and I think it's pretty affordable in Europe too. I think it's probably more expensive here in the United States. And I also want to get some of those colors here in the donuts. I'm going to go with a raw umber or yellow ochre, and I'm just going to throw some in on these donuts. Now, when I did the first painting, I actually thought, because if you look at the reference photo, it looks like it's got some like chopped up chocolate or chocolate crisp or something on the glaze. And so I mixed up really dark brown using ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and I put salt in it thinking that would give me the perfect texture. It gave me an interesting texture, but when the salt did its thing, it actually ended up just pushing the brown pigment away and leaving the blue underneath, so I was getting like blue little speckles everywhere. It was an interesting effect, but it wasn't what I was going for, so I ended up having to fuss with it quite a bit. So we're not going to do the salt just because it didn't prove to be an effective technique when I did it. But it was a fun experiment.
Northern Birder, would you please explain the significance of warm and cool colors when mixing paint? In other words, how do you know when to pick a warm or cool color when mixing?
Well, it's a couple different things. Usually your warm colors are more likely to make mud, or to make neutrals, so keep that in mind. But rather than thinking of warm and cool, think about when you're mixing, what is that color's color friend? So if I'm looking at my palette here, and if I look at that red, well, if I look at this red, vermilion, this red looks way more like orange than it does violet. So that's a warm red or an orange base red. If I'm looking at this red over here, this red is clearly closer to violet than orange, so I know I'm looking at a cool red, a red that's more like violet. So instead of thinking warm and cool, think of what color does it look closer to? Is this blue closer to violet, or is it closer to green? This one's a little closer to violet. It's ultramarine. How about cerulean? Cerulean's a little closer to green, so that's a more green undertoned blue. A warm blue would be closer to violet. A cool blue would be closer to green. That's very hotly contended, or contested, I would say, in the art world. But if you're confused by warm and cool, just look at the underlying colors, and that should help you figure out what you need to know. Okay, I'm gonna get a little bit of that in here. It's just to help you mix vibrant colors or neutralize colors if you don't want them to be vibrant. Do a little bit of my gray in there, my mixed gray. We'll dry this in just a second. I'm just blotting off the lip of that plate again, because it got a little bit of the raw umber in there. Just want to remove that. But now this way we won't have any like hard, awkward edges. So that's why I like to get everything wet and put down a little bit of color to begin with. Even if this area that doesn't have any paint on it, it's not going to be harsh against anything else.
Middle mass artwork. This semester in college, I'll be working on large-scale watercolors, like 22 by 30 inches. Do you have any tips on working large with watercolor?
My first tip would be stretch your paper. That means soak it in the tub. Make sure your tub is really clean. Soak it. Put it down on a board and then adhere it with gum tape. And you can get, excuse me, 2-inch wide gum tape in an art supply store. And then it will be tight as a drum to paint on. And then I would recommend getting some big newsprint and sketching out your ideas first on newsprint, and then transferring that onto your paper just to make sure you're not like way off on a design. You can see it on the newsprint where you can erase and you can make alterations, rather than trying to draw it freehand on a big piece of watercolor paper and then making a mistake and having to erase and potentially wreck a full sheet of watercolor paper. Okay, that feels pretty dry. We're going to mix up some darker brown. Again, we're going to use the same colors we used for the gray. I'm going to have a little more brown in it though, so that it's a little warmer and a little more chocolatey. My paint's pretty fresh, so I just want to make sure I don't get too much in there. And what I'm going to do is, because if I was going to do the salt technique again, I would wet the chocolate areas and then I would drop the salt in, but that didn't work out the way I wanted it to, so I'm just going to go ahead and do a controlled wash. So to do a controlled wash, I have a big puddle of paint there. I am going to make a bead of paint here at the top of this top donut. I'm just going to carry it down until I can get a fairly straight line. And I'm just going to add some more color into that. It's not going to take all of this probably. And I'm just going to tip my paper and work back and forth. And by maintaining that wet edge, it's going to give you a smooth wash. You want to try not to go back into what you've already painted, or you will have back runs. So now I'm coming down to this next donut, keeping it tipped up fairly strong. I'd say it's probably at about a 45-degree angle, my paper to the table. And by working like this, if you know you have a fairly big area without a lot of edges to, that are weird to deal with, it's a great way to get a nice continuous color.
I mean, we could do a whole series on desserts.
Seriously, I love to paint desserts.
Different dessert, well, what would be a good one would be the cream horns.
Oh yeah.
'Cause that would be a lot of like shading and texture work.
Yeah, I really miss the old J.J. Nissen cream horns because they had like that silky filling and they were actually vegan. They went out of business.
Yeah, I liked the ones at Frank's better because they used the real butter.
Oh yeah.
And I like the texture of those, the cream stuff in those better than I like the J.J. Nissen ones.
Is it like a buttercream frosting, like
yeah,
a heavy
yeah.
I like that light.
That's what I prefer for kind of frosting anyway. So.
Well, when the kids saw this depiction of the donuts, they're like, "Oh, I want to eat your props." And I'm like, "Oh, I used a photo," because I actually was thinking about going to Dunkin' Donuts last night when I was so frustrated with my first attempt and grabbing some donuts. And when I told the kids I was thinking about that, they were very disgusted that I didn't.
They're very disappointed. Wait, but Jack's going to the fair, so he probably.
Yeah.
You want me to get you some water?
I got some water right here. Oh, I'm always froggy when my first talking, and I work from home, so it's quite possible I haven't talked to anybody. All right, I'm going to mix up a little bit more brown. I'm going to mix it up this time so that I have a darker version. And something I want to mention, if you have an area, like I'm just wondering if I have I don't think I have a puddle there, but sometimes you'll get an edge like this, especially where we've got two things. So we've got an edge down here and we've got an edge up here where the paint might not travel. You just want to make sure there's no puddles or you will get a back run. And the best way to deal with that is to go in there and tap it with a dry brush, because it will just drink up the excess without messing up your wash. If you go in there with a paper towel, you're going to leave like puffy clouds in there, and that's not what you want for a nice smooth effect. Grab some more Ultramarine. I'm really impressed with this paint though. I can't believe how cheap it is. Some of the colors, not the ones that I used in this painting, but I did notice some of the colors did seem a little bit unusual. Some of the pigments, so I need to research them before I do my review as well, just to make sure they're not all like fugitive colors. Some I do know are fugitive. There's a Crimson Lake that uses the traditional alizarin crimson pigment, which is fugitive, but then there's some I just don't know much about, so I'll need to have a look at those before I give my final take on it. So on this these chocolate bars, there's a lot of reflection here, and it's that cool light that I was talking about last week, how often daylight has this cool blue almost cast to it. You see it a little bit in the reflections here on the donuts, but it's really kind of strong on these candy bars. So I want to do a glaze first of a grade blue. So it's like it's almost like the color we used in the background. It's quite blue, and we're just gonna paint that in. It's small enough that you don't really need to do a controlled wash. Just kind of quickly work, and it should cover pretty well. And that will give us our highlight kind of color. It's a really just soft sheen, but we kind of need that underneath, and then we'll be putting the dark chocolate color on top after it's dry. But we want this underneath to be to save that highlight, but the highlight is not a bright highlight. Get some dust in there, but I think I better let it dry and go after it later. And we'll do the same thing over here to this little chocolate.
Kevin Chu, do you recommend mixing your own greens and blacks or using the colors already pre-mixed for you?
I recommend going with single pigment colors as much as possible, but you can get single pigment greens. I mean, there's single pigment blacks as well. I recommend mixing blacks just because you're going to get a more natural look if you mix your own blacks from colors you've already been using. So a limited palette is, I think, always gives you a better painting. But you know, you can still have 100 colors in your stash, but only use like 5 or 6 of them at a time. And choose colors you think you're going to be able to mix all the colors that you need for a painting, and it's going to represent the feeling of the painting that you want. And that's what I would recommend doing, so that you don't get overwhelmed with how much stuff you have, but you're still getting the proper color. So if I use black to say shade in orange, it's going to look really murky and yucky. If I take that orange and mix it with a little bit of blue, then I'll get a natural shadow that I can add to the orange, and it will look natural. So always look at your opposites and try to mix them. Like with the ultramarine blue and the brown, I'm using that brown for chocolate in so many different areas. It just makes sense for me to make my black that way and keep repeating that color. If I do decide that I just can't get a contrast difference, and I'm at the end, I'm like, this picture's too flat, I need a darker dark, I can always go to that black if I wanted to, if like there's just no other way for me to get that dark. But if I've already gone in with dark to begin with, then the painting's just gonna be muddy, and I won't be able to get back to that. So that's my opinion anyway. So for the strawberries, we can start on with this one because this one's dry. I'm going to take the color known as red, which is actually a quinacridone red in the ShinHan line. It's a real beautiful red. We're going to have some of that. Then we're going to take some of that in another area on our mixing tray or palette. We're going to add a little bit of permanent yellow deep to that. You could also use gamboge or cad yellow deep. Just a little bit in there. We're going to make, it's going to make kind of like a warm orangey red. And then we're also going to take some of that red and a little ultramarine blue to give us a nice shadow. So we're taking, again, the red on its own and a little bit of ultramarine. And those are the colors we'll be using for our strawberries. Now, I don't think you really need to pre-wet the strawberry unless you have a hard time blending, or your paper is maybe finicky, or it's really hot outside. I was having a harder time upstairs painting than downstairs because I was sitting with my back door open and it was really warm. So I pretty much had to pre-wet everything just to keep the paint wet enough to blend. So if that's a situation that you're in, then go ahead and do that. I'm going to start off with the red because it doesn't matter if that red goes all over the whole berry because there's going to be some of that color in there everywhere. And if you want it stronger, you can take it right from the pan. And grab some of the shadow color, add it right in the bottom of the berry. Now, just keep in mind that the wetter your paper is, the more color shift you're going to have when it dries. So I didn't have much color shift in the donuts because I just had, the paper was dry and I just had the water that I needed to make it flow and to get the right shade. So I'm not going to have a big shift, but on these strawberries, if I have this pre-wet, I'm going to have a bigger color shift as it dries. Clean your brush before you go into that orangey red or you're going to get mud. And so you want to make sure that orangey red is not going to be touching the purpley red. And if you have a puddle, just blot your brush off and then stick your brush in the puddle. And we're going to do that for each of the strawberries, providing that what is next to it is dry.
Helena G, can you explain what sizing means in watercolor paper?
Yes, sizing refers to the amount of glue that is added to the paper to keep your paint from feathering or from absorbing too quickly. Paper is traditionally internally sized, meaning they add that glue or sizing, like wallpaper sizing, they add that to the paper as it's being, pureed and molded, and then they paint a coat of the sizing on the outside. That's called external sizing. So for watercolor, you really want a paper that has an internal and an external sizing to it. That's going to make sure that your paint doesn't absorb and feather. If you paint on like computer paper or you paint on rice paper, like think of a paper towel as having no sizing at all, so it absorbs all the water you put onto it. And if you paint it on a paper towel, your paint would just go whoosh everywhere. It would just feather and go crazy. And if you're painting on like a heavily, like an Arches watercolor paper, you're gonna get a nice crisp line when you paint because it has a lot of sizing on it. So and your paper can be anywhere in between those two. Like handmade papers are generally lighter, has less sizing, and professionally mold made watercolor paper has more sizing. And every brand has its own, secret recipe. I like the sizing in Arches personally. This is Fabriano, and I find their sizing to be a little soft. But if I was going to do a lot of scrubbing, or I was going to do a painting where I wanted a lot of pigment to flow, this would not be the paper that I would choose for that. But it's fine for this because I know I'm not scrubbing, and I know I'm not, I'm not like letting a lot of paint just flow. Hope that made sense. Clean my brush because I just did the orangey highlight area, and I'm going to go into that purpley color down here. So I didn't wet this berry, and I had plenty of time to blend. And we'll do this one over here. Again, we're going to start off with our red. I'm using a number 12 round, but you use whatever is a comfortable fit for you. Let me get a hair in there. Man, oh man, I think the cat has been rubbing on my brushes down here.
Probably.
Man. Because it's not a brush hair, it's like a cat hair, and it just went...
Is it a tally hair?
Oh yes, it's a tally hair.
She can't hide that because she's got a lot of it, and it's all about 4 feet long.
And it's cool, and it's cool down here because it's like 90 degrees upstairs.
Yes.
So, oh, what bad cat.
She's outside, so she's escaped.
Grab some yellow and a little bit of that red. Now I want a nice highlight up here, because that's kind of like a little bit of an unripe area. So I'm just gonna wet that little area up there before I add in my orangey color. And it's usually best if you do have a hair in your painting just to let it dry and pick it out later, unless you can scoop it up with your brush, because if you try to get in there with your fingernail, you're just going to scrape your paper and have a mark that you can't get rid of. I'm going to lift out a little bit of the paint from the top of the strawberry. I'm just going to wipe clean damp brush and just lift it back here. That's just the best way I found to get that strawberry highlight because it's really soft. You can still go back in with a little more color if you need to.
Is that the core palette?
This is the core tin, but I put
Somebody asked me
my
that.
ShinHan, because I had a few of these plastic Dr. Peach Martin palettes, so I just put the ShinHan ones in there because it's 30 holes and I have 30 colors. So I wasn't sure I wanted to get them into general rotation until I tried them out, so I didn't bother putting them in pans. Okay. Okay, and now I think we could go over here and do a layer on our chocolate. I'm going to switch to this is actually a nice brush. This is a brush sold for toll painting. It's a Lowell Cornell Comfort Round. Those, they work really nice. They have a nice sharp point to them.
LM, I want to get into watercolor. I've never used them before. Any ideas on the best way to start out?
You could take a class. You could, I have a beginner watercolor playlist on YouTube. If you go to my YouTube channel and click on playlists, there's the ones that I would recommend a beginner start with. I also have a beginner class if you want an online class. You could probably find classes in your community, like high school adult ed or something, if you like to learn with people. I would say just get a decent quality set of paints. Doesn't have to be expensive, and just play with your paint. Just have fun. I am just putting in my I'm going to be glazing over the whole chocolate in a bit, but I'm just getting in kind of these darker areas right now. I just skip around to an area that isn't wet, basically. We'll be adding more shadows to the foreground, like on the tabletop. But I like to get the elements in first so that we can kind of have a feel for how much shadow it would cast and all of that good stuff. Hopefully it's not glaring. Sometimes I can see glare, but it doesn't show up on the screen, so that's good.
Marcel Etienne, what are the best steps to take if I want to do my own matting framing for my watercolors?
You just need a decent cutter. It doesn't have to be like a machine. There are handheld cutters. The Logan 2000 push style is what I use. And you want a sturdy, long, straight edge. I got one from the hardware store. It was a Master Mechanic brand for a couple bucks, and it worked great. That's what I would recommend starting off with. And you just need a large area to cut on and like a large piece of foam core that you can cut on. You can order your framing supplies online. I get mine from Jerry's Artorama. You have to order it in 10 sheet packs, but you can assort your colors. And yeah, it's basically all you need. You just need some practice. I do have a video on how to cut mats too, if you're interested in that.
Which is probably good if you've never cut it before, because
Yeah.
it's tricky. There is a skill to it.
Yes, there is. And, you know, basically you want to keep that bevel, that 45-degree bevel when you cut, so that, you know, it looks nice. You have the outer mat that's colored, and you have the inside of the mat that's white, and it just looks really pretty. I've took the raw sienna and some of the brown, raw umber. You could use raw sienna. In fact, it looks like a raw sienna. I was surprised it was a raw umber. Could be a translation thing, because these are Korean watercolors. And I'm going to go in and add some depth to our bottom of our donut. Need a little shadow under the icing. And I'll go in, clean my brush off, and just go in and soften those lines. Just be careful when you lay, if you do rest your hand on your paper, just make sure that where you're resting it is dry. Donuts don't have a ton of texture on the skin unless they're like broken into or they're bit into, which these are not. I'm going to go and add some depth to this donut back here. But you can kind of dry brush a little bit Just kind of drag that paint around until you don't have very much paint on it anymore, and then just kind of brush it up so you get a little bit of texture. You can use the side of the brush too. You can keep tapping that on there, keep scumbling that shadow so that you got just a little bit of texture, not a ton because it doesn't have a lot. I'm going to take a little bit of that brown mix, the brown and ultramarine that's kind of grayed down. I'm going to add a little bit of that to the bottom of the donut because there is a lot of shadow back there. That's a bit much though.
Creta Strawn, what are the advantages of tube watercolors over the cake style?
There really isn't. It's just personal preference and what is available in your area to purchase. It seems to be easier to get the tube kind in America, but I think in other areas it's easier to get the pan style. I will say though, I find that if you're buying like a pan watercolor, it often seems like if you're unsure about the quality of a watercolor, if you get it in a pan and it's not all cracked, then you know you've got a decent paint, but sometimes you don't know about tube watercolor until you've let it dry down in your pan, like if it has proper binder or proper humectant in it, and it might kind of like break apart on you and stuff. So so that would be the only advantage for pans. But then again, for tubes, you can use whatever palette you want and just squeeze your paint into it. You have the option of letting it dry out or the option of letting it of using it fresh from the tube, and that's personal preference. Some artists only use it fresh from the tube, some artists only ever use it dried down, so it's a completely personal choice. And there are good pans and there are bad pans, and there are good tubes and there are bad tubes. I guess you could say that even if you have if you bought a tube of watercolor, even if it didn't dry down, you always could still use it like a tube of watercolor, use it wet and it would behave properly. But for me, I like to know that my paint's going to dry down well because I usually prefer to work from it dry. This one you can't really see a lot going on, and we're going to powdered sugar effects on these guys, so I'm just getting a little toning in there. I'm not worrying too much about it. And the inside of that donut we can see, oh, what we're seeing the donuts in the background. I was thinking that was, I'm going to color that there too. Oh, and I need a little bit of donut there. I need to color. Okay, for our green on our strawberries, we're going to use Viridian, which is a single pigment green, and some permanent yellow deep, which is the same yellow we were using on our strawberries. And we can go ahead and give them, just be careful if you're next to an area that's still wet. We can paint we're just going to paint them all first with that color. Actually, I'm going to get some more yellow in there. We want kind of like a spring green color.
Diane Riley, how do you decide if a picture is trash can worthy?
Gosh, if something's really frustrating me, the painting might even not be that bad, but if it's frustrating me, I might feel like it's trash can worthy. But I generally, if it's at that stage where it's like it can't get any worse, that's when I start to have fun with it and just play with it. So I guess I never really call something trash can worthy. I mean, if worst comes to worst, you can always gesso over the paper and do a pastel on it or something, or do an acrylic painting on it, or some other mixed media work. Oftentimes, if you're feeling it that way, just leave it alone for a few days and come back to it, and you'll see it truly how it looks. Because if you're frustrated or you didn't enjoy painting it, that's going to come through, and that's going to taint your view of the whole thing. So you're not going to feel good about it. So you give yourself a little time away, and then often it's not as bad as you think it is. far the lines there. I still feel so froggy. Man. How many people do we have hanging out today?
We have 230.
Nice.
And Azalea P, what to prepare for a watercolor basic workshop? I've been asked to give a workshop for beginners, and I would love to take the opportunity, but I'm not sure what to prepare.
Well, I would, if it's for beginners, I would choose something that you could paint in your sleep. You want something that has very predictable results, that you feel comfortable teaching, and then make sure all of your students have the exact same supplies. So if it's beginners, they probably don't own their own supplies. You can go to like, I'll show you an example. You can go to the dollar store or even Oriental Trading, something like that, and you can get little colors like this. You know, give them a dollop of each color, explain how concentrated it is, and they need to add water. You could set up the palettes ahead of time and let them dry so that they won't, using wet paint can be difficult, but I found when I provided palettes like this for my students and gave them like a plate to mix on, it works so much better than them having a big palette with all kinds of colors, because there was nothing they didn't need, and it just eliminated so many variables. So I would do something with a limited palette with limited supplies. That won't cost a lot of money to put together, and maybe have a pattern that they can all trace, or have it transferred already if it does involve drawing, like it's not a landscape or something. And that way everyone's going to have a successful outcome, and those who want to learn more, you know, can then contact you about other classes, and those that just were kind of there for like the fun atmosphere will have something, you know, fun to show their friends and hopefully talk up your classes about. But keep it simple would be my advice, and multiply how long it takes you to paint it by 3 or 4, because that's how long it will take your students to paint it. It's true though.
No, because they're all gonna have questions, and some are gonna struggle more than others, and
you're gonna have to repeat yourself a lot. You might want to do like a handout with like all your color mixes and stuff. That way you don't go hoarse. Especially if you have a big group and you don't have like a microphone or anything, it just takes the guesswork out of, well, what do I mix with what? It will really save your voice. Again, I'm doing the shadows over here. Ultramarine blue and brown, which is a burnt sienna. I'm really impressed with these cheap little paints though. This would definitely be something I would get for a class. Hopefully Amazon doesn't go jack up the price. I hate it when they do that. I hate it when I recommend something because it's such a great deal, and then they go, oh, it makes me so mad. It was funny because I asked Marty Owens about these, because I've had them, they've been in my cart for 2 years. And I was going to order them, and so Marty comes back and he goes, I'm not a fan of the ShinHan. And then we laughed about his play on words. And they're like, oh, okay, so they're probably no good. Marty says no. And then I was talking to Angela Fair a couple weeks ago, and she's like, oh, they're really good. So I'm thinking they could have changed. I know some companies change their formulations. They could have changed in between times, or it could just be, personal preference. You try something that's not your cup of tea, and somebody else will try it and they'll love it. So I'm like, well, I'm gonna give it a shot. So many people have asked. And so far I'm liking it. They remind me kind of the Mission Gold. I mean, but if you have watercolors, it's not like you need these. If you already have colors you're happy with, I mean, these aren't necessary. These are more of like if you've been looking for something a little more affordably. They call them professional watercolors, but they do have another line that's higher up that's more expensive that I've never tried. Because I'll take a $25 gamble, but not a $100 gamble.
Yeah,
when I have so many watercolors as it is. A little bit of a watercolor addiction.
Yeah. there could be worse things that you could be addicted to.
Yes, that's true. And I know these chocolates look like a hot mess right now, but they're going to be fine when we do our over glazing. I'm just getting these shadows in. The thing that I found, and I'll show you on the piece that I didn't end up doing today, but the thing that I found, at least with this paper and these watercolors, is that if you keep layering, like on a background, if you've got a patchy background or a patchy area, and you just put another layer of paint over it, another layer of paint, it will even itself out. So if you've done a background and you like regretted it because like, oh no, what a patchy mess I made. My flower was so pretty. There's actually a tutorial by Anna Mason, I believe, on YouTube, who does a background, or it might be in her Craftsy class. I'm not sure now because I have seen her Craftsy class. She did 3 layers on a background. I'm like, that's going to be a patchy mess. And it wasn't. It was like clear as a blue sky. I couldn't believe how clear it was, but you know, it's like 3 layers and it's going to clear itself out. It's amazing. Let's see, what is dry? Okay, so for the donuts, there's a couple different things I could do. So if we're looking at a reference photo here, we've got really dark shadows. We've got some semi-bright highlights here. They're not really direct highlights, they're more like bounced light highlights. And then we've got this crunch, and the crunch is about the color of the donuts. So I could go and paint around those little bits there, but I think that would be quite time consuming and aggravating. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go in and paint my darks, and then I might scrub out some lights. I might use a little colored pencil. I might even use some white paint. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And then we're going to spatter on our crackle. I've already taken a scrap of paper and I've cut the circle out of it, so that I'll be able to just kind of work it around and spatter against it. So I think that's just going to be the most direct way to get this done and have it done in a timely manner. Since this is an hour, we'll try to keep it to an hour live stream, or pretty close to that. So I'm going to mix my really dark again, ultramarine blue and brown, which is burnt sienna. I'm going to add a little water to that. That's a little too pasty, so a little bit of water. Make sure we don't have any clumps because my paint is still pretty fresh. And because right now this glaze looks very flat, so we want to make that appear like we've got a little bit of, like we're inside the donut there. So we're going to add some dark. And this is going to be so much easier than trying to paint around stuff. I use masking fluid on the first donuts, and I don't know if you guys all know my personal feelings on masking fluid. I think
probably not everybody does.
It's similar to my personal feelings on chrome oxide green. I'm not a fan.
If you want to see Lindsay make a face, mention either one of those words and her nose wrinkles.
I don't like to stop what I'm doing to wait for masking fluid to dry. I don't like the smell of it. It really impedes my creative process. I used to use it because I was so uptight about not wanting to use white in my work. But I decided I'd rather use white. I'd rather use colored pencil. I would rather do a lot of things than use masking fluid. Sometimes I will. I know if it's just like a little sparkle on a highlight or something, like on a dewdrop, then yeah, sure, I'll use a masking fluid, or I'll use an X-Acto knife and cut out the highlight. But for the most part, I don't really like to mess with it. I don't like waiting for my my fluid to dry. I don't like potentially damaging my brushes if I don't wash them right out immediately from using it. I mean, I use a crappy brush for masking fluid, but if I mistakenly grabbed another one, I just personally don't like it. I don't think there's nothing wrong with the product. It's a good product. It's just not for me. So I'm not going to do that on this painting. I did on the other one thinking, well, I'm just going to suck it up and use some masking fluid. And I wonder if maybe that's what got me started off on the wrong foot on that painting. All those little masked off sprinkles.
Probably.
And I don't like the hard edge. I don't like the look of it when I take the masking fluid off. I always have like an odd, like a really awkward, unrealistic looking hard edge. And I just feel like I spend more time, softening the hard edges and, messing with that. It's like, give me a white colored pencil. I'm not entering in competition, so. But I do put masking fluid in my essential tools and techniques for watercolor class because I do think it's an important tool to know how to use. And then you can decide whether it's for you or not, because some people love it. All right, I'll let that. The other cool thing about mixing your colors is that you can get some really interesting effects. Like, so you can see on my palette here, like when the colors start to separate, you get a lot of water in there. You can see the blue and the brown pull apart, and when that dries on your paper like that, you get some really interesting, colorful, granulating effects, which I think is pretty. Not everybody likes that, so if you don't like that, you might just want to find a single pigment brown that is the color that you want. But I happen to really like that effect, so you know that works for me. Luckily, there's so many different options. All right, now I'm going to do another layer of shadow on the tabletop. I am going to a number 8 round, and I am going to pre-wet here. And the reason I'm going to pre-wet is so that I don't get hard edges, because it can be difficult to control your shadow. So I just want to wet from, like, I would say the bottom of the plate to the paper, bottom of the paper. And I want to make sure I get in there, because I didn't get any of that background color in there for whatever reason. This will make sure the edges of our shadow are soft and we don't have any, you know, hard edges that look funny. Okay, and you just make sure it's like a soft sheen. You don't want to see puddles if you tip it to the light. And we're going to go with that same color we just used for the for our chocolate, but when you have it mixed in equal parts, it's a gray. So if it's a little too brown, just add a little more blue in there.
Empty nest scrapper. Why is it that artists don't like to use white paint?
It's a watercolor thing, because I'm sorry.
You are froggy today.
I am. It's because watercolor is a transparent medium, so the luminosity comes from the light coming to your paper, going through the veil of watercolor, bouncing off the paper and coming back to your eyes, and that's why it is so nice and bright and white. And so if you mix white into your color, you kind of lose that a little bit. You lose that luminosity, and you have more of like a creamy tone to what you're painting. So that's why a lot of watercolor colorists or watercolor purists do not use white. I don't like to mix white too much unless it's like a detail, like something that would be opaque in real life, like if I was doing sprinkles or powdered sugar or something like that, where I wouldn't necessarily, I don't want light to go through there and bounce off. Obviously I could use masking fluid or salt or another technique like that, but now that I'm older, I definitely will choose the technique that will give me the look that I want, or I'll work in the style or process that I feel like, rather than doing what is, you know, what would be suitable for competition, because I'm not competing for anything. I'm going to mix up a little bit darker to go in some of those darker areas. So again, ultramarine blue and brown. Not as much water. I'll blot my brush, even get any excess water out, and just get that in there where it's darkest, and it'll flow out into the water that's already there. I'm not a fan of using black, even in like oils or acrylics, just because I feel like if I mix my own black, it looks a lot nicer.
Angel Tea, can I use something in my mixing water to keep it from drying out so quickly on my paper?
Yes. Glycerin. You can get that at the health food store or at your pharmacy. It doesn't have to be food grade, so you can get it at the pharmacy if it's cheaper for you. It might be. I get it at the health food store because sometimes I'll use it in like a homemade bath and beauty products. So that way I just know it's skin safe, if it's food safe, and everything. Use it to make taffy too.
Really?
Yeah, I was into making taffy for a while.
I'm not a taffy eater, so.
I don't like to eat it, but it's fun to make.
Well, I figure if I'm gonna bother making something,
Yeah.
I want to make something that I like to eat.
Yeah.
I have a friend. She loves saltwater taffy. She only has it a couple times a year, and she's a special place she gets it from. And I don't get taffy. I always feel like it's gonna pull out a tooth.
Yes. Yeah, I know.
And I know it's not, but man,
I bet it could pull out a filling.
yeah. And I mean, I have a couple, but they're on the sides of my teeth, so that'd probably be okay. I don't know. I'm just not a chewy candy type of person in general.
I like Mary Jane's, but I don't do them too often because I'm afraid they'll pull a filling out. And now that Necco company is closed,
I know. I love the Necco wafers.
You love really
and the conversation hearts that you would
Oh,
get on
that's
Valentine's
right.
Day.
Yes,
They were the
I
only
love
good ones.
conversation
The other
hearts.
brands don't. They're not as good.
I like the sweet tart ones.
I don't like those. They're not as good.
I think looks wise, I like the look of the Necco ones, because I've done a painting of like a jar full of Valentine's hearts before. But I like the taste of sweet tart ones because I like sweet tarts. Never liked the wafers, but the wafers are handy if you're making gingerbread houses.
Yeah, they do. They do look cute on a gingerbread house.
This plate has kind of a like a fluted flower type edge, but I know it's probably not absolutely drawn accurately, so I'm just kind of hinting at it. So if something you drew might not be quite up to snuff, just hint at it. Or if you're not quite sure how something looks. I completely forgot a donut back here.
Whoops.
The forgotten donut.
Oh, it's just a plain donut.
Don't worry, you'll get some powdered sugar, guy.
Are you labeling that donut?
It's a boy donut. How'd you tell? How'd you know? Don't go there.
I'm not.
It's a family show.
KM Himes 1. How do you decide whether to use hot or cold press paper?
I generally use cold press unless I am doing like a really expressive landscape. In that case, I would probably choose a rough paper. And I pretty much only use hot press paper if I'm doing like more like a drawing, like with water soluble graphite, or something where I need that really smooth texture. Or if I'm rubber stamping, because I enjoy rubber stamping and then coloring with watercolors. So hot press paper is the best for that. I like it even better than Bristol because Bristol is it's suitable for stamping and watercoloring because it is pretty durable, but it's not quite as durable as using a watercolor paper, especially if you know you're going to do a lot of mixed media techniques like a art journal page or a really heavily embellished mixed media card. But a lot of botanical artists prefer the hot press paper because it's so smooth that they can get the detail with the teeny tiny brushes. I don't tend to use teeny tiny brushes, so the hot press paper doesn't have as much benefit for me. Now we're going to do a little bit more layering on the strawberries. So I'm going to go back in first with that red on its own.
We had 2 questions about adding glycerin to water and how much would you add?
Oh gosh, maybe like 5 drops, a teaspoon, somewhere in that. Don't put too much. You don't need that much. It will.
You can always add more.
You can, and I don't even think you need much. It's going to, and just put it in your clean water. So like if you're looking at my bucket here, I won't put it in the dirty water, the side where I clean my brush. I put it on the side where I'm picking up fresh water. God, both sides look pretty dirty there. But it's the bucket that's dirty. The water's actually all right. So you just want a little bit in your clean water. It's going to prevent it from evaporating. Just want another layer of color on there. Remember, that one is the one we painted. We painted with water first, and it was really, we knew we were going to have a shift. This one I'm just going to tap in with my brush so I get a little bit of texture. Oh shoot, I forgot to grab that hair out of there when it was dry. So tempted to reach in there with my fingernail and grab that hair out of there, but oh, darn it. Oh well. Oh great, now I just put it on it's on the chocolate bar now. Tally.
Tally, you hairy beast.
A little bit of that purple down on the bottom. Ultramarine blue plus red. Quinacridone red. That's alright. I got a glaze coming on that chocolate bar anyway, so nobody will know there's cat hair in the chocolate. So I'm just dabbing so I do get a little bit of the pocked texture of the strawberry skin. It's gonna have some real texture in there. It's gonna have cat hair texture.
It's a very real life picture. She got her hair all over me. When I stopped to say hello to her outside, she rubbed all over me.
Oh, wow. She doesn't rub on everybody. You count that as a...
Well, that's because I'm the food source for them when you guys go out of town. So she's like, I gotta stay friends because this is the one that usually comes over to feed me and let me in and out. Becca Hans, is there a way to put watercolors on wood?
You can, and it all depends on how... what you're going to use the wood for. You could stain the wood with watercolors. I would recommend a liquid watercolor like Dr. P.H. Martin Radiance. It's not light fast though, so if you do go that route, just know that that it will fade. You can use watercolor ground on the wood, which is basically like a white primer, so it's not going to look like wood afterwards. And you could do that. And the other thing would be kind of paint it just on the wood if you want to keep that wood look underneath, and then spray it with like an oil-based sealer, because the oil base won't reactivate the watercolor, so you'll get that tinted wood look and it will have a little protection. But just keep in mind that watercolors are much more fragile than other medias, so it's probably not going to last forever, you know, without fading and the acids in the wood, you know, turning it colors and stuff. But if it's for like a decorative item or a craft project or decoration at a wedding or something, it would totally be fine. I'm glazing over with a watery brown on both of the chocolate pieces. I like this brown color. I've refilled it a couple times since I only put little like pea-sized dabs out, but I've refilled it twice since I started painting with this yesterday. Be really curious to see how it dries down. Hopefully that strawberry doesn't... I got the hair. That was driving me nuts.
I could tell it was by the look on your face.
It's like having a hangnail.
Yeah, I know. I chewed one of those off my fingers yesterday, and I shouldn't have. But I couldn't help it.
You just can't help it.
Oh, well, I used to be a wicked nail biter too, so that doesn't help.
Ooh.
I don't bite my nails anymore, but for like many years I was a wicked nail biter.
Did you ever get that stuff that tasted bad for your nails, so you wouldn't be tempted?
I wouldn't be surprised if Mom bought it to try,
Mm-hmm.
but it didn't work if she did. I think I probably stopped biting my nails around the time I picked up smoking in college, I think.
Oh no!
But I gave up smoking too, and I haven't gone back to nail biting, so that's good.
Yeah, that's good.
Iris Tau, would hot press paper be a better paper to use if you want to scan your watercolor artwork and reproduce it digitally because of the smooth texture?
Gosh, probably would. I honestly don't see too much texture when you scan work, but I bet that, sometimes I do. Like when I scan the drawing, because I drew directly on my paper here yesterday, and then I just scanned my paper, and I could see a little bit of texture on my scan. So, it probably would help. I mean, if you can create the artwork you want to create on the hot press paper.
Gail AC, I always have trouble with reactivating the dried color underneath while glazing. What am I doing wrong?
So it sounds like her paint underneath is reactivating, and she's trying to not have it reactivate while she goes over with a transparent layer. Usually that happens when you're when either you're using student grade watercolors or your paper is really heavily sized. So we were talking about sizing earlier, which is like the amount of glue they put on the paper to keep it from, basically to keep your paper from absorbing too much and letting your paint feather. If there's too much sizing on it, it's just sitting on top and it's got nothing to soak into, and that can prevent your paint from adhering. So it could be your paper has too much sizing, and it could be you're using student grade paint. Student grade paint will have fillers in them that will kind of dilute the pigment and keep the pigment from absorbing into your paper. So it's one of those two things I pretty much guarantee. And also, or it could be you're using a brush that's too stiff. So make sure you're using a soft brush, and you're using staining colors. So if I wouldn't glaze and have ultramarine blue or burnt sienna as my underlying color, because those are sedimentary. They're not going to seep into the paper, so they will lift back up if I'm not really careful. So make sure you're using colors like, if you look at your palette, the colors that are like the most acidy, like bright colors, are going to stain. So they'll be like your reds, your violets, your cyan, your like phthalo blues. Any of those super vibrant colors are the ones that are going to stain, and they'll be better for having underneath your glazes. Okay, so let's see. Let's do some glazes on our leaves. We're going to take Viridian, and let's just grab a little bit of that mixed orange. That was our red and yellow, so let's add a little bit in there, and we're going to get this nice rich dark olive color. Now of course this does come with a green that's almost identical to that in the kit, but since we've been using these colors already, we can mix what we already need. That's better than taking something that's already done, because you're going to have harmony in your painting. I think I'm going to switch to a smaller brush though.
Pollage One Art, with the rock painting craze, how could you use watercolors?
I probably wouldn't advise watercolors for rock painting. You would have to use like an absorbent ground, and that's kind of expensive, and watercolors per ounce are kind of expensive, so I would definitely recommend using acrylics for that. They dry quick,
and they make outdoor acrylic paints now for outdoor projects.
Yes,
so you know, for $1 and some change for a 2-ounce tube, 3-ounce tube, or whatever they come in.
Yeah, those bottles, right?
Yeah, the bottles. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would do that, because the watercolors are going to cost so much more, and they're not going to last as well. They just don't have the binder. When you're looking at watercolor, you've got pigment in gum arabic, which is a very weak binder. It's that's why watercolor painters are so concerned with light fastness, because the binder isn't protecting the paints and the pigments. Like with oils and acrylics, they don't have to be as concerned with what they use for a binder or what they use for pigments, because the binder is so robust. But with watercolor, we've got this fragile binder that is able to be reactivated, and that's why we love it, because it's so luminous, and it's, you know, just the pigment and a little bit of binder, and it's such a pure type of paint. But because of that, it doesn't have the protection that an acrylic would have or an oil would have. And there's some really fun like acrylic paint pens on the market. I have like the Hoo-Hoo ones, which is just fun to say. I'll show you what they look like.
It sounds like a Dr. Seuss
it does, doesn't
brand.
it?
Ooh.
But these are really fun. They've got a spongy bullet tip. I don't want to drop it on my thing, but it's like, I don't know, I think around $10, maybe $15 for 12. And I mean, those would be fun. You can refill them with just like your regular craft paints. And I mean, something like that would be so nice for rocks where they're rough and kind of hard to paint on. You wouldn't want to use your watercolor brushes and risk fraying them, because it'd be just like, you know, sanding them on sandpaper. So I would just definitely recommend using an acrylic. And I'm not someone who's crazy about acrylics, but I think you're going to have a much more enjoyable time. You're going to have, if you're going to spend the time on it, you're going to have something that's going to last. And you want them to last, because you want people to find them, you know, hidden outside, and bring joy to somebody's day. Mixing up a little bit more of that. Viridian yellow, a little bit of red. And I had a really great comment, question from a viewer saying, well, how do I, my hand shakes. How do you get such a straight line? And for me, resting my hand on the table and pulling a stroke towards myself or towards my dominant hand, that keeps me from getting wiggly lines. So see, my wrist is right on the table. I've turned my paper so that I'm pulling a stroke towards me. You should always be comfortable. You don't want to be getting up from painting and have, you know, your back hurt or your neck hurt, or that like right between your shoulder blades hurt. I always seem to, like, if I'm making jewelry, if I'm not sitting right, I will have that right between my shoulder blades.
Yep.
Ache. And it sneaks up on you because you don't realize it until bam, you know, you're...
Yeah.
It's fun to add movement in the strawberry lines there. So we're going to put some seeds on the strawberries. We're going to use that permanent yellow deep. That's one of the reasons I chose this yellow. Earlier when we were talking about warm and cool colors, I talked about warm colors making muddier mixes. That's because warm colors tend to be more opaque. I'm not sure why that is, but your warmer colors will be your more opaque ones. So I knew that if I used this permanent yellow deep as my yellow, I would be able to use that as my seeds because it's a warm yellow and I knew it would be a little bit opaque. It would be just opaque enough. I didn't want to have like in your face seeds. I didn't want to use an acrylic paint pen for this because they'd be too bright and too opaque. So I'm using my little brush and the watercolor for this. They'll fade. They'll kind of settle down into the layers of paint underneath, so they're not going to be this bold. I'll hold it up so you can see. It's not going to look like, it looks a little polka dotted right now. It's not going to be that polka dotted when it dries, but it's going to be enough that I can see that I have seeds there. So I just try to stagger them a little bit. They will be lined up a little bit, but try to make them not perfect because that way your brain won't try to go match things up when you're looking at them. You want them to be a little bit out of order. And don't worry if they look too bright because they will fade as they kind of dissolve into the layers underneath. Going more on the tip of the brush for this one back here, just trying to do smaller seeds because it's a little bit further away. Okay, now we are going to go in with our paint pen or white gel pen. We're going to give some powdered sugar to our donuts. And this one I used a gel pen on, you can see that, and I'm just going to use this Posca pen because I prefer the Posca pen, but I only didn't have one upstairs, so I actually do have an extra one, but I haven't remembered to put it upstairs yet. So I'm just going to dot for powdered sugar, and if it's too bold, we can go in with white paint, white watercolor, and do some dabs of white watercolor because that won't be quite as opaque, and it will help bridge the gap between the two medias. I like this better than colored pencil because colored pencil, you're not going to deposit that much if you tap, so you need to kind of rub the side of the pencil lead, and then you might end up just getting just an all over white and not getting the texture that you want, which is that that kind of speckly sugar. Any questions?
We're all caught up for the moment.
Oh, good. And then as I get away from the top, I'll like not have quite so many speckles, so it can kind of fade away. Are you good, Sarah? You don't need to leave. Do you need to get back to work? Okay.
I got all the important stuff done this morning, so.
Okay, cool.
And right now it's just making sure the work gets done. We're so booked. We're not taking any more appointments until the 15th.
Okay, cool. You can totally plug your business if you want to.
Oh no, that's okay. It's fine. Yeah. So John is he's right now, making sure the work gets done, and I got all the money in the bank and the bills paid today. So
awesome.
And everybody got paid.
Well, that's the most important thing.
So.
I will say the paint pen is a lot easier to use than than like a gel pen, because it has the paint right at the ready. And I did find I tried a few different white paints for refilling these Posca pens. The Chromacryl Blockout White is the best paint that I've used for this. You can get it, I think I got mine at Blick Art Materials. I'm not sure. It's the student grade chroma acrylic. But it's the Blockout White. It's very matte and it's very opaque. So you can thin it way down so it will fit in your pen, because other whites, sometimes when you thin it down, they're too transparent once you've added the water to them. And I don't find that with this. So now this is a part where you've got to take a little leap of faith, and you've got to trust yourself and not overdo it. This is the highlights on the strawberries. So I'm going to show you the reference photo. I kind of overdid it. I'll show you the reference photo and I'll show you where I overdid it, and I'll show you where I really liked it. So here we've got, it's the smooth skin around the seeds that have the highlights. Okay, you can see it there, you can see it there, you can see it there. They're very sharp highlights. They're very bright. When you look at that versus the highlights on the chocolate, or the highlights on that chocolate, these are like really bright. They're almost as bright as the white sugar there, so that's why we use the pen. So when I did it, I really love the way this berry came out. I thought that looks really glossy and fresh. This one, I probably had it pretty good to begin with, and then I overworked it, then I went back in with paint. It was just back and forth, so it was kind of a mess. So just try to go light, go easy, and then step away. You can always go back and add more white, but it's really, it's hard to get rid of it because you have to kind of go over. I went over with colored pencil, and it was really difficult. So I'm going to put way less on this so you can get around some of the seeds. I'm going to be needing to add a little bit more shadow to this one. I know this was the most challenging one, so I wanted to get it done first. Now I'm going to move over to this one, which wasn't so hard for whatever reason. So our light's coming in from here, so it's hitting the underside of some of these seeds here. It's hitting like around the seeds up here, and that's where it gets a little confusing because you're getting such a bright hit of light here. So and it starts to go into the shadows, so it's just a little more confusing on that one. Over here it's not quite so bad. I try not to just draw a circle around the seeds, even if it looks like that's how it is. I just try to have it kind of broken up a little bit, so I'm just getting like a little bit of a glisten. And up here is not going to be as much because this is really covered up a lot by the donuts would be blocking a lot of that light, so it's just little catches. And then I can add a little bit of highlight on the chocolate. This will be my brightest highlight. I will go soften it with a watercolor. I want to get there because that darker spot in there would be the inside of the donut, so it would be catching a highlight on the outside. Up here. And not as much over here, maybe just a little bit here on the edge. Maybe a little bit around the center. Maybe a little bit more over there. But I love this pen. I mean, these are so fun, so awesome. Okay, so now we want to do, actually I will go in with a little bit of white. I'm going to use my number 6 round synthetic Taklon brush here, the little Cornell. So I'm using this brush because it's not going to take too much water, but I am watering down my paint over here so that it's not too thick. And then I am just going to just do a little bit of kind of a hazy shadow, highlight rather, sorry, next to these streaks.
Creta Strawn bought some Bria Reese watercolor inks and was wondering if they could use them like watercolors.
Yes. Yeah, I got some of their metallics on clearance, and gosh, those are gorgeous. They're fun. Totally. You might want a little palette like this, where it's got like the little deep wells like that so they don't leak into each other. Or go to the dollar store and get a pill box. One of those like day of the week pill boxes because they're deep, and just make sure they're sealed all the way down through. They're not like when you go to the the hardware store and you get the little bolt buckets and it pulls out. You have the little dividers that pull out. You don't want those. You want something that's fused all the way down. All right, so now I'm going to grab my little template here that I made, and I'm going to use this for speckling our like little chocolate crunch stuff. And I'm going to use a toothbrush for this. And I am going to just grab some of that white. And I'm almost out of that brown, so I'm just going to go right in there and grab the rest of that brown. And hopefully that is enough, that's loose enough. If not, I'll have to mix up add a little water to it. But this is handy because I can make myself a little like template, and then I'm just going to flick on the topping there. The little, they're not really jimmies. They're more like just like a crunchy topping. And I had a little round one. I saved the inside and the outside of this mask so I can set the outside there. And then I can do this top piece as well. Hopefully that's not too shiny. I think it was like a scrap of photo paper.
Would you need to use a fixative or a pre-wash for using ink tints on fabric? Do you know?
Nope, you just need it. It just needs to get wet. I did a couple aprons. I did an apron and I did a little tulle apron, and they with ink tints, and they were great. You could take a little water and you could mix some fabric medium in with your water if you're worried about that, but I really don't even think you need to, but you do need to make sure you get it wet, like everything gets completely wet. You know, for some bigger dabs, you can go in with a brush and dab some on. Especially over the darker chocolate areas, because they will show up a little bit better. I'm gonna make a little bit more dark. I'm not sure if I'll show you this, so I need to get a little more brown. This is what those paints look like. The 30 color set, 7.5 milliliter tubes. So they're decent sized tube. Usually like little sets will have like 5 milliliter tubes. I'm actually going to put that here because I need to clean out that brown pan because I got white in there. And let's go to ultramarine blue. Okay, I want to do some shadow. And you could do this layer that we're doing now with colored pencils if you want to. That would look really nice. The colored pencils are wonderful for doing adjustments towards the end of a painting like this.
Shell L, I got some crafts for all watercolors as a gift and was wondering if you'd heard of them or used them.
No, I've never heard of that brand before. How does she like them?
I think she was asking you. I don't know that she's used them yet.
Oh no, I've never used them, so I wouldn't be able to give you an opinion on them.
She says the colors are impressive, but I'd love an expert opinion. So maybe she has.
Oh, I say, If they work good, then use them. They're good. You know, you can always do little tests where you you know, color, you make little swatches on a piece of watercolor paper, cut the paper in half so that half your swatch is on one paper, half is on another, put one half in a drawer and put the other half in a window, and see if they fade after a couple months, if you want to, if there's no information on that. But if you're just going to use it in a sketchbook or an art journal, I say just enjoy it, have fun, and don't worry about it. Or if you know it fades, then say, okay, this is my practice watercolor, this is my experimentation or just having fun watercolor, and leave it at that. And
or if you have a niece or a nephew or a child and they want to watercolor,
oh yeah,
you could let them use it.
Absolutely. You don't have to worry about it, and they get to use real art supplies. And if you haven't been over to my blog post today, I have a post today on dealing with your inner critic. So if you ever find yourself just unsatisfied with what you're doing or judging yourself, go give it a read. I think it'll give you an interesting perspective on how to handle those situations. All right, and I'm going to grab a little bit of my darker color. I'm going to put in some shadows around the seeds. I'm going to use my red. I'm going to take my red, and I'm going to grab a little bit of that mix that was the ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna. So it's going to give me a dark, but not very purpley of a dark, but it's still going to go with this because I'm using that red. And I am just going to give little shadows around some of these guys. A little more water in there. That's a bit intense. And just going to tap in some texture too. And we're just about done here, guys. We're in the final stretch. Tap some over here too, just in the shadow areas. So if you guys have any questions, we'll be wrapping up soon, so make sure you get them in. And if you're watching the replay, you can leave questions in the comments area. Take some red on its own and a little bit up here.
Strawberries are delectable looking.
Oh, good, thanks. Sometimes it's hard to tell when you're right on top of it. Yeah.
Do love strawberries.
Oh, me too. I love all berries.
Yeah, all berries are pretty good.
So good for you. And I'm going to take a little of that red on its own, and some of these areas where I feel like the white's too strong, I'll just lightly go over it. It's not going to stick great anyway because it's watercolor, so you don't really have to worry about overdoing it, but that can help you temper it if you feel like it's just too bright. It can just tone things down enough so that it feels more natural. And then I didn't get powdered sugar on the inside there because I didn't have it colored in time. So I'm just going to get the powdered sugar on the interior donuts there that we're seeing through the donut hole. And I think I'm going to call that done. I'll dry it so we can see how it looks dry because our sprinkles aren't completely dry. So if you have those last minute questions, go ahead and send them our way. And I'll show you the differences between the two paintings where I changed things for time and whatnot. And I'll tell you what I did just in case you want to try something fun at home.
Oh, and you might want to tell people what you're using. We always have questions about the tool you're using to dry.
Oh yes, this is just a heat tool. I have it handy because I use it for rubber stamping, which is another hobby I enjoy. But you can use a hair dryer if you want to speed up your drying, as long as your paint's not too wet, because a hair dryer blows more air. This is just heat, not really a lot of air. But if you're not a rubber stamper, you don't need a heat gun. You can use a hair dryer. I probably will go back in and maybe brighten up some of the sprinkles on there with maybe some colored pencil or some other paint. Let's just see what this one looks like. Get it started on my paper here. Oh yeah. So I'm just going to dab in some of this because my other sprinkles weren't showing up that well. And you could put like drizzles, you could do whatever you want for your topping. But you can kind of see how adding that white to that paint, how it has a very milky appearance, which I think is fine for sprinkles on a donut. But say you were trying to paint a cup of black coffee and you had added water to it so that you could get the right shade, or a cup of tea, but not like a tea with cream, but you wanted it to look like black tea or black coffee, that wouldn't give you the look you're after. That would give you a much milkier, non-realistic, it would look like, you know, coffee with cream. So you definitely want to add water to it, not add a paint that made it opaque. So it's like the difference of painting a glass of Coca-Cola, for instance, or painting a chocolate ice cream. You know, you'd add white to the chocolate ice cream if you wanted it to be opaque, whereas you would just have, you know, just add water to the, you know, Coca-Cola. And then if you want to add a little more highlight, you can do the highlight with the pen, and then you can spread it with your finger, or you could use white paint if you wanted to. The nice thing about the pen is that if you decide you want to go over it with watercolor, it's not going to move, so you can keep your brighter edges.
We had a question about the insert in your core tin, and where did you get it?
That's from Dr. P.H. Martin's, the people that make the Bombay inks and the Hydrus watercolors. Because they have so many liquid medias, they have these palettes that are designed for that. And what I had to do was I took, because it's a little bit too big for this, so I took a wood burning hot knife tool and I sliced off the edges so I could nestle it in there, and it fits perfectly. But I did have to take kind of the feet off of it. But it works great in those core tins. I have my Mission Gold paints in one of those as well. And the old core tins, if you bought the 6-color set, you used to get that big tin. Now you have to buy the 24-color set to get the big tin. I saw at Fiddleheads in Belfast, they had, like last year, they had this, like another one of the 6-color tins, but it was in a big thing, and I almost bought it just for the tin. But luckily I just KonMari'd everything, and I realized how incredibly insane that was. Alright, so I'm going to call this one done. I didn't spend as much time on this as I did on the original, but like for the chocolate here, what I had done, I wish I took a picture of it before I decided to go over it. I had painted this really dark with a mixture of ultramarine blue and brown, burnt sienna, and like really wet, and then I sprinkled in salt, and it gave me a really great texture. I was hoping for the texture of my reference photo, which was pretty close, but everywhere the salt was, it pushed away the pigment, but it left a blue stain underneath, and that just was not going to work for a chocolate topping. Maybe I might practice that with some other colors and see if I can find a color that I could do the salt with where it would push away the darker pigment but leave a lighter pigment behind. Maybe if I used a staining yellow, or I might even have to paint it a really pale staining brown first, like a transparent brown oxide might be a little more stainy, and then do a darker mix on top and salt it. I don't know. I had high hopes for it. It wasn't exact. It gave me great ideas, but it didn't quite fit the bill. I did the same thing here with a mixture of the brown and the raw umber, and did the salt, and that you can see a little bit of the texture in there. It was nice, but it wasn't that bright white I needed for powdered sugar. But it was fun nevertheless, and I'm glad I tried it. But pretty much the other techniques were the same. I did do a little highlights with the gel pen on the stems, and I did do a little bit of red colored pencil on the tips of the stems. And I did, you know, add a little colored pencil here and there for some hazy highlights and some hazy shadows. So if you want to do that on your painting, go right ahead. You've seen me add colored pencil on top of watercolor before, so the process is the same. And I think that pretty much does it for today's lesson.
Okay.
Any more questions?
We're caught up.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for watching. Before you go, I'd love it if you gave me a thumbs up. And I spend a lot of time preparing for these live shows, so if you like them, please share them with a friend. I'd love to see more people hanging out, and I'd love to reach more people with these free tutorials. So thanks again, and until next time, happy crafting.